Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Mokoto Man at YouTube with another modelling video. Today we'll be answering our questions from last week's Q&A question gathering session. The weather's pretty terrible, so there's going to be trees hitting the studio metal roof and wind and whatnot. Please bear with me. We've got a lot of really interesting questions. I can see some new timers asking some questions too, which I'm very excited about. And not much in the way of shout outs, so we will jump straight into it. Civic Gunpla. What are some useful modelling techniques you use but aren't that widely known or utilised? I think a lot of the techniques I do use is utilised or known by a modelling community, but not necessarily mainstream in larger or public modelling. At the moment, with people snapping and whatnot, just using glue and paints is starting to become a rarity in Gunpla. Though since most people in Gunpla come from different communities and backgrounds, they bring back what they know. So wargamers will attempt their model kits in a wargaming fashion. Ship and military modelers will do that. Car modelers will do a lot of prep and fancy, very clean colour schemes with the high gloss. Probably more obscure methods would be very old-fashioned methods using non-hobby paints, so things like oils or artist acrylics. That could be a bit unusual. It's something I don't utilise anymore. I use some magnets. I use a bit of metal in my scratch builds. When I scratch build, I like using brass wire and sheeting and whatnot. It's a military thing, but it's a fairly rare method. Another one is probably the use of furniture shellac as a weathering substitute. That's quite unusual. And magnets as articulation and for parts to have some sort of colour separation, play value or part swapping, but that is widely used in wargaming. Probably the weirdest thing that I'm currently doing is utilising drafting and 3D printing, but that's only very new and is slowly catching on and going from strength to strength. A bit of a broad question, but some of my methods are a bit unusual because I'm a bit of an unusual modeller. Probably have a look at my Gunpla Mecha model workshop videos. There's about 100 of them, and there should be some interesting weird things there. Cyber Dragon 451. This is a long question. What's the best prep method to keep your models streak free when hand painting? I like airbrushing because the paint goes on well and flat, but when I practice hand painting it just doesn't look as good. Videos I watch usually show enamels being used with Gunpla and the paint comes out looking as well as airbrushed, but I prefer Tamiya acrylics because they're easier to get in CA, California I assume, where I live. What's the proper method to hand paint Gunpla with acrylics and make them out properly? I have a video in Mech Gunpla Model Workshop tutorial. It's on hand painting in both water-based and Tamiya acrylics. The trick to do that is to water your paint 50-50 or further. Your paint is so watered down, when you apply it on the surface it looks quite blotchy and transparent. And when you put your first coat down, painting large areas, it generally looks quite terrible, but because the paint is so thin and it's not having total coverage, it dries absolutely streak free because there's not enough paint build up to have streaks. And once that dries, you keep applying really thin layers of acrylic paint until it builds up and all the transparent layers overlap and becomes quite a solid and refined finish. It is extremely flat. It is self-leveling because it's just so much thinner evaporating out, producing that chemical reaction. And once you're done, you can actually put a few layers of clear, the same method, give it a bit of a polish, and it's going to be just as beautiful as an airbrush job. So the trick is heavily water down your paints. Put it on skewers just like other Gundam modelers. Allow it to dry, apply another coat. Could take many days to do this, but it will be absolutely streak-free and beautifully airbrushed. For small areas, when you're painting fine detail and whatnot, just add 20% thinner, mix well, and just do it in a few coats with the finest tip brush you can find. Look after it, and do that in a few coats until it builds up nicely. Though with hand painting tiny detail, enamel is the best. So if you may not be able to get hobby enamels, probably look at a really high quality artist enamel or artist oils. Artist oils apply beautifully, but they take many days to dry. That's probably the best methods for streak free. Brush care is very important. I won't talk about it now, but if you just do a Google tutorial on looking after paintbrushes, it'll tell you everything in pictures and text. It's pretty basic. Dr. Cadmans, probably. Hello. Sometimes when I'm airbrushing, I mask certain areas, but when I remove the mask, the paint also comes off. Any tips? I suggest using Tamiya masking tape. It has low tack. That's a good start. Step 2, when you paint, allow the maximum amount of time for it to dry harden. So that's acrylics, lacquers, 24 hours, enamels, oils, 3 to 5 days. Once you've done that, apply a gloss clear on top, and then allow that gloss clear a maximum amount of time to dry and harden. When you mask, and if you muck up and make a mistake and it lifts the paint, it's going to lift the gloss clear and not your base paint. But if you practice good patience and you wait a maximum amount of time for the part to completely dry and harden, you shouldn't lift paint. And if you're using low tack Tamiya masking tape, even if you can't get it, 1 or 2 rolls will last you half your modelling career. You can buy that off eBay. That will work quite well. Also consider using other masking methods like blue tack. Blue tack is very low tack and it's excellent at also masking parts. More of a soft mask. Blues Brothers, what do you think about using craft acrylic paint for modelling, and do you use them? I used to use craft acrylic paint a very, very long time ago. When I was very new to modelling, I didn't have a lot of money. I think I used very cheap, very nasty paint and struggled with it. But if you go for artist acrylics, they have an excellent pigment density. And if you thin it out appropriately and paint it the same methods as you do for modelling, you shouldn't have any problems. Now for canvases and whatnot, artist paints are a lot thicker consistency, so you can have streaks and build up and whatnot. You just need to heavily thin it down. So it's probably a good idea to get some jars, thin it down to the correct hand painting or airbrushing consistency, and just have them in large batches and use them when you need to, as if you would with your hobby acrylics. Another problem with artist or hobby or craft acrylics is hobby acrylics has resin in it, and it is generally strong against, or has resistance against solvents. So when you do an enamel or an oil wash, or you put a lacquer top coat, it'll resist that. If you use the artist stuff, the binders and hardeners are generally a lot more safer and natural. They're not as resistant to solvents, because artists are less likely to use solvents if they're all water or all acrylic. So they're just stuff that you have to consider. What I suggest is, if you're using something, if it works well, excellent. Do a test model, do test pieces, test spoons, practice panel lining, practice lacquer top coats, and if it works out, roll with it, because the artist paints have some pretty wonderful colours, and it's an excellent way of saving money. I sincerely hope you can hear me. I'm going to have to talk a lot louder because the rain is hitting pretty hard. Got a metal roof. We will keep going. Timber Swiss 3. Hey Alan, not modelling related. how are you finding Pokemon Go? What are your thoughts on it? I was in school during the late 90s, early 2000s when Pokemon was a big thing in Australia. Love it, love the concept. Though as someone who works and whatnot, I don't own a smartphone. I don't really participate. I've got quite a few personal modelling and professional projects on the go. I just don't have the time to put any effort into it, but when I do, I'll probably have a look into it. My biggest concern with the game is the security risk of your phone, malware and all that. It's generally an app that collects a ton of information and sends it God knows where, so there's a good chance if I don't play it soon, I'm never going to play it. I'm cool about other people playing it. Looks like fun, looks alright, but not my cup of tea, not a big video gaming person. Funnily enough, I actually do a lot of walking, so that would have probably made some of that more interesting and fun. John Smith Hatter. I just got my first plane model. It's a 1144 MiG-31. That sounds quite tiny, though I think the MiG is a very large aircraft. Be very fine detail. I have a few questions about the plane modelling. Mainly, where do I start? This Revell model has no detail, and so I am scribing more panel lines with a BMC chisel. I am familiar, that is a very basic snap kit. This is a beginner level project for kids, younger ones, people entering the hobby. I actually think I've got that somewhere I was going to use as a Mecha Musume kit, so I know the exact project you're talking about. It's only in a few parts. This is just knowledge I have gained from Gunpla. Where do I start with planes? Any really good books or YouTube channels, guides that you know of? Or are you just a tank and Gundam modeler? I know planes have a lot of actual weathering on them, but at 1144 it would be really fine weathering detail, as this may be a challenge, I'd imagine. Anyway, I'm attempting my first plane model, and where would you go for high quality how-tos apart from my channel? I used to do planes. I do the odd plane here and there. I'm more into World War II. World War II is a bit different because they'll have an aluminium body. They'll put paint on it and it'll weather and chip and go in combat and whatnot. Cold War modern planes are a bit different. Their alloys and materials are completely different. Their maintenance scheduling is different. They're less likely to lose paint or chip or anything like that, unless they're in a boneyard rotting away. The weathering is very subtle around where the wheels come out. The jet engines would have some soot and build-up. There would be some wear and tear where the person would walk up to the cockpit. But generally, they're generally very, very clean, except for exhausts and the jet burners. With that, I suggest you build it. Decide if you're going to model it on its landing gear down or in flight mode. Once you've done that, mount it on a base or not. If you're going to have it flying, get a clear acrylic rod, stick it in a base. You're going to have to drill a hole, glue it, cement it, putty it in. And painting wise, there is a lot of different methods. What I normally do is I'll rig up a coat hanger to support the wings. I'll paint the top, let it harden dry, flip it, another day I'll paint the bottom. And decals, washers, all the usual stuff. Gundam kits are generally very similar to aircraft, especially if you're doing the clean, nice Gundam prototypes kits opposed to dirty Grunts and Zaku's and GMs. So I'd imagine you'd have a lot of fun. For resources, there is a lot of YouTubers that do aircraft. I know of a few who do World War II stuff. Rob Basic Modeler, Harry Houdini. Absolute ton of them. You can go down an absolute rabbit hole looking them up, following them, watching their videos. A ton of fun. But I suggest with your more modern aircraft, that's something I haven't delved in for a very long time. I don't know who the big YouTubers or modelers are. Fine Scale Modeler magazine, and Ming magazine would have some good information on that, but there's stuff that you have to buy. For YouTube channels, just go for a bit of a Google search, a bit of a hunt, have a look for some modern aircrafts, and go for it. Have some fun. That's the best advice I can give, as that's just a bit out of my expertise. Though it sounds like you know what you're doing, you're having a lot of fun, and hell, when you're done, send me a link or something. I'm keen to check it out. Sendolence, I pronounced it wrong. Doesn't matter, my apologies. Could you explain how to do sculpting onto plastic parts using Mr. Dissolved Putty and the Zimmerit tool? Mr. Dissolved Putty is a build-up putty. It's quite liquid, quite watered down. I don't personally use it. I'm not a big fan of it. You apply with a brush or a cotton swab. It's good if you're done sculpting, you've got some dents, the surface is not up to scratch. You'd use Mr. Dissolved Putty and then sand it back when it dries. Mr. Dissolved Putty, even though used by some people that sculpt, you can't sculpt by yourself with Mr. Dissolved Putty. It needs to be in conjunction with other products like epoxy putty, Tamiya quick type, green stuff, Milliput, that sort of stuff. Just mean using stuff like Mr. Dissolved Putty, Tamiya Putty, Sculpt, Zimmerit Tools, Mr. Surfacer, 12,000 on Gundams to change design. I see, that's part 2 of the question. Mr. Dissolved Putty is only one step to many steps of sculpting. I suggest probably the first best start is to get Milliput and Tamiya extra quick putty. Get your fingers wet. The putties etch and stick onto plastic very, very well. The best way to learn how to sculpt is simply get some putty, get some scrap parts, mix the putty, stick it on, play with it, and just have a bit of fun, go a bit wacky, go a bit crazy, and do something that's just a throwaway. Get familiar with the material, know how it feels, how it sets, how long it takes to harden, what you can sculpt with it, what you can't sculpt to it with it. When it dries, then practice sanding it, cutting it, chiseling it, do all that sort of stuff. You need to have a good understanding of the material before you start sculpting what you really, really want to do. With Zimmerit, and I've got a tutorial on this, I find the best material for Zimmerit is something for Bitaflex. I like using green stuff. Green stuff sticks to plastic very, very well. You can buy large quantities of it on eBay in a tube or a long snake for about $20 from the UK, regardless where you are around the world. It's ideal to get a few packets because of shipping and whatnot. Mix it, apply it as thinly as possible to a surface. Make sure your fingers are wet but the surface is dry and clean of oil. Spread it as wide as you can, and once it's stuck on there, use your Zimmerit tool to create the patterns that you desire. Make sure with these tools that you constantly submerge it underwater and keep it wet, because as it gets dry, it'll start to stick to the putty and lift the putty. Putty does not react to water. It actually avoids it, but it will stick to dry surfaces, including your finger. So for now, buy some material, practice, have a bit of play at sculpting, doing surfaces on some scrap kits or material. Do a bit of Zimmerit on a spare part, sand it, paint it, have a look at it. If it's what you want to do, then do it on a kit. If you need further help after that, because this is just an introduction, you're always free to come to me. Yosef Al-Zala, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name. Got a picture of Einstein as your avatar. 3 questions. 1. Is it possible to use lacquer paint or enamel without priming the model? Is it tough enough without primer? It is possible. The bond is going to be obviously weaker. Primer generally gives your kit a uniformed base colour to work with, so the multicolours underneath do not bleed through your paintwork, especially if you're using light coloured paints. Primer just ensures your paint doesn't lift, something doesn't go wrong, the colour's uniformed, you can mask efficiently, you can layer efficiently. if you really do not want to use primer for whatever reason, sanding your surface with 400 grit sandpaper wet to rough it up a bit so there's a bit of teeth to eat into the paint is ideal. Lacquer is the best paint to use on a bare surface than enamel, as the solvent eats into it. So if you just put a coat of lacquer and then you paint enamel on top of that, that's ideal. You will have to make sure that the maximum amount of time for drying and hardening passes. Painting without primer is generally a bit of a pain. I don't really recommend it. And the added benefit of a microfiller for seam lines and scratch building and all that is just that much of a benefit. I generally don't do that, but these are the theories. These are people that I know that practice these, and it is possible, and you can get away with it. And if it works, it works. Go for it. 2. What is the best PSI for airbrushing paint, especially for metallic paint? I paint at a very low PSI, generally around 11. Most people go between 15 to 22. That's the Goldilocks zone for a 0.3mm airbrush at generally a 30 to 50% thinning ratio with almost any type of paint. With metallics, generally closer to 22, depending how thick the pigments are or the flake. They can struggle to get through an airbrush. Make sure that the nozzle of your airbrush is clean at all times, especially after metallics. Just take the nozzle off, put a bottle brush through and see if there's any gunk or pigment buildup, loose tissue, whatever. Do that every 4 or 5 colours. But yeah, 15, 22 PSI is the way to go about it, and then adjust to whatever your tastes are. Again, mine's 15 to 11, and it's very thin paint for a very subtle finish. 3. Tamiya X22 Clear. Can I use it straight from the jar, or should I thin it down, and how to use it? It is already very thin. You can almost use it straight out of the jar at a higher PSI. I suggest mixing 20-30% thinner. Mix it thoroughly and it just sprays absolutely beautifully. If you're hand painting, yeah, just straight out of the jar, though you generally want to extend its life out and just have more coverage, so thinning is always a good idea. Thank you for your help and your cooperation. No problems anytime. You're cool to ask questions. Enjoyed them. Tristan, my mate from Sydney. My question, why am I so awesome? Seriously, mate, you're awesome. I love your taste in kits, building. You're fascinated by older, weirder, rarer kits. Your methods are a bit unorthodox. Our tastes are just generally very similar. So this is generally a loaded question. Other people may say otherwise, but I am obviously a big fan of your work. And Tim answers, because you are, seriously, and damn straight. Tim, again. Dear Alan, reading through the questions here, there are a lot of very good ones. The quality of the modelers have grown a lot thanks to you. No, I don't think I've trained a lot of these modelers up from scratch. I think they just come along, they cherry pick information, they leave a little information behind. I'm just pretty much a trading station of information on the people who passes journey in whatever they wish to do in their hobby. I'm very happy doing that and being a bit of an information broker, but it's a lot of fun. I can't take credit for bringing everyone up to the quality that they're at, but I'm probably attracting people who are at an intermediate or advanced level and looking at filling in knowledge, which is perfectly acceptable, but beginners are always welcome. Enough with the sticking of feathers up your ass. There we go. Got full of myself. Here are my questions for you. In all honesty, I meant what I wrote. Fair enough, mate. Fair. Oh, Jesus Christ. Paragraph after paragraph. I wish I could say too long did not read, but we're going to get straight into it. A few months ago, back ordered 2 types of Candy Blue by Alclad. They come in, as you know, already thinned, already to use. And what do you know? The airbrush again struggles with spraying that stuff. Now, I'm a bit lazy, and I don't take out the 0.3 needle, but this isn't a problem with Alclad primer, which even contains microfiller. So you're probably using a spray gun or something, I'm not too sure. Normally 0.3 I struggle with the Alclad primers, but Alclad is designed for 0.3 airbrushes, cleaned at your 1522 PSI, no water in the line. Now you have to be careful that the candy colours are enamel, as you stated. It's going on top of lacquer. So generally you need to make sure your lacquer is fully hardened. You put the candy on top, you let that fully harden, and then you put whatever finishes you want on top of that, or cracking will occur. I've also learnt that the Alclad candies must go on top of Alclad. You can't really have anything in between like a clear or other effects paints, because it just cracks like crazy. It absolutely hates acrylic or future or anything like that. I've struggled there, but realistically with this sort of stuff you just have to crack out the 0.3 airbrush, and at least just make sure everything behind the nozzle is clean, that there's no debris or anything. You shouldn't have too much problems, but with what you pay for Alclad, you should put in the extra effort. The candy colours by Alclad are enamel, so I tried to thin them a bit. Remember, you have issues with some Alclad paints thickening over time due to opening and closing the lid a lot. True. With the appropriate thinner, this didn't help one bit. The stuff doesn't seem to dilute, just like the Revell Clear Blue. After thinning it with Silius based thinner, the stuff of course dilutes, but I can't spray it on the chrome or candy silver base, both by Alclad, without getting a weird effect. I get circular spots in the paint. This is where the Silius thinner eats through the top layer of the paint. Normally when I thin my candy colours, I do it with gum turpentine, and I'll only use a few drops and shake it up quite thoroughly, mix it. That works quite well. I don't know about the thinner you're using. Maybe that's reacting, maybe it's reacting on top of the lacquer. If you've contaminated your paints with the incorrect thinner, maybe they might have to go out and try a new. If you want candies that are very easy to apply, the Mr. Hobby Colour candy line is very, very vast and very, very easy to use. You may want to have a look at that. They might have to be bought from Hong Kong or whatever via eBay, because they're not too available in the West. There's something like 10 to 20 colours, quite awesome. But generally my enamel clears don't really thicken or harden due to the nature of the thinner, even opening and closing. I only use a few drops, but always had an easy go using them straight on top of any finished surface. So I'm not too sure if it's a bad batch. Sometimes paints can come in a bad batch. Sometimes if you use them, put them back in the jar, you might have slightly contaminated them. Being quite new, depending on when you bought it, they probably had it on the shelf for a long time. Alclad has the unfortunate ability of sometimes going bad over many, many years, and they're just impossible or too hard to use. I have a lot of trouble with their coppers, and they just thicken and turn into a disgusting sludge. If they thicken and you can't dilute it, it's probably because the paint's far too old, and even if you bought it new, they've just given you old stock. So at this stage, if it's starting to get too difficult, you might want to throw out, buy it from a supplier that has fresh stock. Try again. Use gum turpentine for only the enamel candies. And if all of that's far too hard, I suggest invest in Mr. Hobby Colour lacquer clears. Their lacquer clears are excellent. They've got a special line of it. tons and tons of colours, beautiful magentas and browns and all sorts of things. Never had this problem with Mr. Aquarius Clear Blue acrylic, which is an alcohol-based thin accordingly. That is true. Any idea how to solve this problem? By the way, spraying it with pressure recommended on the bottle. I made a contraction to measure the pressure coming out of the nozzle to make sure that there are no pressure losses or gains due to fittings and couplings, so I know for sure that the pressure is the one I needed. Even generally with pressure, it's very flexible. I don't spray at the recommended. I spray at a lower PSI. You could spray at a higher PSI. Pressure's not that much of an issue if the consistency is wrong, or if it's generally not atomizing correctly and sounds like you're having an atomizing issue. Even tried to up the pressure with no success. The paint keeps spluttering out of the nozzle. Also stripped the airbrush and did a thorough clean. Do this every 2 weeks, but it did it right after the first time the problem occurred. Again, sounds like the issue I had with my copper paint. Sorry for the life story again. Not at all. You're giving adequate information. It's plenty of information to work with. Trying to give as much information as possible so you don't look into things that aren't needed and thus wasting your time. And also, this is good information for all of the punters and people playing at home. Again, I think you've either got a bad bad paint. The paint has gone off. The paint's being contaminated. Something's happened. Sounds like your surface is fine and everything else is working okay. If the paint just doesn't work out, maybe change your brand. There are other lacquer alternatives. If that doesn't work out, buy another batch from a different source and see how that goes. And that's all we can do at the moment. Sounds like you're doing everything else correct. Yosef again. I use AK Gloss Varnish and I thin it 20% with Vallejo thinner, but I don't know why the results came to me tacky or lightly sticky to the touch. Is there any reason for that? I know AK and Vallejo has gone to bed with each other, but I don't know how compatible the two are. Maybe you should only use AK thinner exclusively with AK Varnish and Vallejo with Vallejo. Vallejo thinner is a bit strange. It's a weird beast. It's got the weirdest consistency and colour I've ever seen in a thinner. It's almost like a fatty oil. With Vallejo thinner, you really need to shake that thoroughly before you use it. Same with the Gloss Varnish. If that doesn't work out, what my normal to-go is to get some Tamiya X20A acrylic clear and just coat that. If you're normally left with a sticky finish from these water-based or enamels or whatnot, sealing it again with a different type of clear and knowing that clear dries and hardens correctly will solve the problem. To prevent this happening from future, knowing how tricky and Vallejo can get very funny with contaminants, different thinners and whatnot, and AK being quite similar. It just sounds like the, unless I'm wrong, it just sounds like that the two maybe do not go together, or you did not shake the thinner correctly. John Yusko. How to remove seam lines without having to prime and paint. Any other techniques that don't involve making putty with plastic and cement. What you can use is a really thick thick cement. So what you do is use something like Testa's tube cement, which is a bit thicker. Glue the part, push. You have excess plastic stick out, leave it, file it back. It should look consistent. Super glue and baking soda. You put a little super glue down the seam, you put baking soda, it'll turn white and it'll harden immediately, and then you sand and buff until it goes completely clear. That is an option, but realistically, if you're not painting, the only way to do that is with ground up plastic and cement, which takes an insane long time to dry. There There's not too much other options out there that I'm aware of, besides just using surplus stick glue and sanding that back. Again, that takes a very long time to dry, and it's very similar to using ground up plastic and cement. So I'm very sorry, I don't have too much information on that. Leo Stewart, are there any tutorials you recommend on sanding? Yes. Now generally, if you are cutting nubs or you're removing seam lines, I like to use 320 grit sandpaper, dry then wet. If you are going for a high gloss finish, use that and then move up to about 800 grit and then 2000 grit, and then you may be able to polish, use that all wet. So you want to have an assortment of sandpaper. The best sandpaper, places that sell automotive supplies like paint, putty, sandpaper for cars opposed to wooden hardware stuff. They've got the highest quality sandpaper. It lasts a very long time in water. Cut them in small strips, fold it over a few times. If you are scratch building, I like to use a very coarse sandpaper, such as about 120 to 200 grit, and I coarse the hell out of it. It gets very scratchy and whatnot. Bit of dissolved putty, bit of primer, and then again you go back to the 320 grit sandpaper. Wet sand the hell out of it until it's smooth to the touch. Move to 800 grit. You keep sanding until it's smooth to the touch. Wet 2000, and when you rub your finger up and down it, you like the consistency. It's perfect. If you're going for a matte finish, you want to rough up the plastic so it doesn't look glossy. So you would use 300 grit sandpaper, wet or dry, rough up the surface, leave it as is, prime it, paint it, and the scratch marks should not go through. Anything that's coarser will. If you want to quickly buff it up with 800 grit sandpaper, that is completely acceptable. Now, I definitely do intend on doing a sanding tutorial soon for paint preparation as well as nub removal and all that. If you were using bare plastic, you just snap a kit and using bare plastic, you probably want to go from 400 grit sandpaper wet, move your way up to 2000 to make sure that you don't stress the plastic out and it keeps its consistent colour. So keep that in mind if you're not painting. Move from 300 grit to about 400 to 600 grit. And looks like that is absolutely everything. Just got one question that's come up. What about putting glass paint jars on a paint shaker? That's a silly question. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, stay tuned. Remember, when I upload videos, we've got some interesting information in the description. Have a good look at the description. I have been a bit quiet on Facebook, but I post there a lot. I still upload videos every week. Older Gunpla forums, if you're looking for a good modelling group on YouTube. Not YouTube, Facebook. And that's about it. Thank you very much for watching. And we shall do this all over again next month. Again, if you have questions or anything, you can always leave questions in any of my videos. I check my comments once a day. Anything that is posed as a question, I always answer, even if it takes me a few days if I'm very, very busy. If you wish for privacy, I'm very happy to go via private message. I know how to access private messages on YouTube, so they're regularly accessed. Private message on the Mokono Man Facebook page is also accepted. And we will definitely do this again. I had a lot of fun. These were some excellent questions. Thank you very much. See you later.